Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. And let me bring up my panelists. I've got April Orman, VP of Customer Success at Zuora. I got Deborah Eastman, Chief Customer Officer at Satmetrix, and Monica Adractas, VP of Customer Success at Box. And we're going to be talking about customer success as a function, where it sits within a company and how the customer success organization is able to work across the different functional silos that typically comprise a company. But before we get to our panelists and their insights, I want to kick it off with just a couple insights from an analyst perspective. So, being successful at customer success, we always think it takes focus on 4 dimensions. It takes focus on having the right customer success strategy, which is dependent on how you tier your customers and where you are in your growth trajectory. It takes focus on having standardized processes to be able to engage consistently across the different tiers of your customers. It takes being able to amass the right data about your customers, about your products and how they're used and what features are the stickiest and how your products are and features are used, contractual data, customer feedback, customer issues. And then it also takes focus on having the right organizational structure and to be able to ensure the success of the customer success team. And what we found is that customer success as an organization tends to reside in 3 different functional groups. It can reside in sales, in a customer service or support organization, or in operations. And what we typically find is when the customer success group lives in the sales organization, typically the company is responsible for lower complexity products, where the customer success organization is responsible for the ongoing success of accounts. They're not responsible for new sales. There's that clear delineation between hunters and farmers. And the farmers are your customer success teams that, again, are responsible for the ongoing success of your installed base. And they tend to be gold on retention as well as expansion. When we see the customer success group residing in a service organization or a support organization, we tend to find that these companies are producing higher complexity products, where the customer success group takes the role of the trusted advisor. They may have product expertise, they may have deep domain expertise, and they work with the installed base to ensure their ongoing success and to be able to have them achieve their business goals. And they tend to be gold on retention as well as customer satisfaction. We see the customer success group residing in an operations organization when the company is more mature, when there's a clear delineation between a sales function, a customer service and support function, and an operations function. And here again, we see them gold on retention. But what we find is that there is no clear organizational structure for customer success. As you all know, it's a new role, and we see that where this organization resides in a company is as dependent on the complexity of products and the size of the company and where it is in its growth trajectory as on the company culture. And what I'd like to do is delve into this question about how do you make your customer success organization successful, and how do you work with other groups within your organization to be able to ensure the ongoing success of your customers. And to do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our panelists. We've got April Orman from Zuora, who's responsible for product adoption, expansion, and advocacy. And she also owns the renewal process at Zuora, as well as the NPS program and the 9 keys for subscription success. We've got Deb Eastman, who's our Chief Customer Officer from Satmetrix, and you're responsible for the customer experience across the entire company. And you're also responsible for thought leadership about NPS across the organization. And then we have Monica Adractas, who's our VP of Customer Success at Box, and you run the customer success and the marketing teams, and you lead the cross-company customer retention and churn initiatives. So, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We're excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you.
I'm just excited because I'm warm for the first time today.
So, maybe we should start with you, Deborah, and have you explain what the role of the customer success team is in your company.
The role of customer success is really about value realization, and we really see value realization in 2 parts. One is product adoption. I mean, clearly the ability to take advantage of the capabilities of the product and deliver on the promise of what caused customers to purchase the product in the first place. And secondly is around best practices. I think with most of us, and particularly in our business, we have a technology platform for managing Net Promoter Programs. People are looking for those best practices to really complement the technology. So it's a combination of driving those 2 things that give our customers value, and that's what the customer success team is focused on.
April, where does customer success fit at Zuora?
Customer success reports directly to the CEO, and I think that when we talk about the customer success being a #1 priority, I think a lot of organizations say it's a #1 priority, but really, how do you actually demonstrate that, and that your customers know that really it's not just a couple of words, it's actually actions that you take every day in terms of how you interact with them and how you actually nurture the relationship. So I'm very, very fortunate at Zuora to say that customer success is #1, and how the management team of the organization has really proved that is by having it report directly to the CEO, and we're the only function that is going to see triple-digit headcount growth this year.
Wow. Has it always reported to the CEO?
Yes.
That's good foresight in setting up the organization. And Monica, where does it sit at Box?
So at Box, nobody reports to the CEO. Everybody reports into our COO, Dan Levin, who I believe was up here earlier today. And customer success, all of our customer-facing organizations do report directly to Dan. And, I think the advantage of that for us, we're a very customer-centric, customer-back company in our thinking, and we just wanted to ensure that we had that focus with absolutely no conflict of interest with sales or any other objectives. And so I think that's what that really enables us to do.
That's great. So our next question is, in terms of who owns customer success, what are the pros and cons of having it report directly to the CEO?
I think the pro is that it makes sure that your customers have a seat at the table, that you are, in effect, advocating for your customers, because sometimes, especially if you're in a hyper-growth company, trade-off decisions have to be made. And by having customer success report directly to the CEO, when those tough decisions have to be made, they're made appropriately cognizant of all the other business decisions that have to be made. So one piece of advice that I would have for you is that if you are a leader of a customer success organization and you don't have a seat at that table, a seat at the e-com or the e-staff level, whatever top management structure you have in place, then that is your opportunity to transform your organization to truly understand how important customer success is, especially if you're responsible or have any retention or upsell goals.
So Deborah, you have a slightly different title. You're a Chief Customer Officer. So how do you support your customer success teams, and what are the pros and cons of it living in your organization?
So I think, first of all, just to answer the question in terms of who owns customer success, I think the whole organization owns customer success. And I think we all have to just accept that. I think the role of customer success is a very specific functional role that proactively manages that relationship and shepherds them through their journey. So to answer your question about my role and how it differs in terms of the organizational structure, as a Chief Customer Officer, my responsibility is really about our customer experience at all points of interaction, whether that's in our product, whether that's in our customer success team, our professional services team, our support organization, wherever that is. So I have a different role than probably many of the people here in that I'm really trying to touch every part of it. As it gets into customer success, it's about making sure that the customer success team has really a couple of different things that are important for their success. Number one is make sure they have the latest best practices so they make our customers successful. And number two, make sure that they've got a escalation point in the organization with somebody that's got a lot of clout across all parts of the business to go make things happen and go break down the organizational silos so that we can actually serve the customers in the best way possible. And so those are some of the things that I really focus on with our teams.
And Monica, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on this idea of, customer success really being a cross-company game. We do it a little bit differently at Box. So, I have a team within customer success that we called Box Retain. And what we did is we essentially set up a little strategy function within customer success that thinks and operates across the company. And so what this little team does is, they've got sort of the ear of the executive team. They do a lot of the metrics, analytics, sort of identifying where big opportunities lie, both in terms of retention and expansion, and then drive a number of cross-functional initiatives across the company to get after them. And I think, besides having a loud voice, which I could not agree with more, I think one of the things that's enabled us to be pretty successful in that cross-company approach is that, we essentially have 4 metrics as a company that we drive towards, and retention is one of those 4 metrics. So we talk about it as a company, right, on a monthly basis, and I think what we've found is that, a lot of getting that cross-company, cross-functional buy-in is really about thought leadership, right? And really, while we think and breathe retention, every minute of every day, not everybody does that. And so reminding everyone in your company what of the importance of retention, how it drives economics, et cetera, has just been, really helpful to our success.
One thing I wanted to add is that when you're thinking about the customer experience, and one of the challenges I think a lot of businesses have is that how do you ensure that the customer feels nurtured as they pass through their life cycle with you? So if you think about sales owning the relationship during prospecting, then the customer signs, and then they may go through services, and then they may be, if customer success doesn't own implementation, they own the customer at point of go live. How do you ensure that that experience is seamless for them so that by the time they get into quote-unquote customer success, they're not feeling like they've been thrown over the wall 2 or 3 times already? So when we talk about what are the pros of having a customer success function, it's because we're trying to drive retention and we're trying to drive upsell and we're trying to ensure that they have value and that they're continuing to adopt your product in the right way. But you also have to think about that if your customer's going to be transitioning through various departments in your organization, what is the one thing that can tie everybody together? It could be a metric, it could be a methodology. So when Kate mentioned at Zuora, we have the 9 keys for subscription success. That's our methodology for tying every single function in the organization around what is the customer trying to do. So at Deal Alert, a sales engineer does a write-up and says, here's why the customer bought and what it is that they're trying to do. Global Services then takes that, goes through implementation, does an update to that write-up, telling us how far the customer got. And then the customer success manager then says, okay, this is how far you got. Let's figure out what your current state is versus your future state. So really think about when you're owning that relationship, you may have to think about what's the experience as your customer transitions through, and then what is the thing that's going to tie everybody to that customer as they progress through the life cycle.
Can I explore that a little bit more? So do you have clear handoffs as the customer transitions between different organizations that everyone understands? And how did you come up with those?
I think sometimes we still struggle with that a little bit. I'll just be very candid. It honestly, it goes back to really understanding why the customer bought and what it is that they're actually trying to accomplish. So for us, that write-up that explains the 9 keys: price, acquire, build, collect, nurture, measure, account, iterate, and scale. We have what the customer's trying to do at every single one of those points. So as the customer transitions through their relationship with us, we constantly build on that so the customer's not having to repeat themselves. Yes, there are transition conversations that have to occur, and part of those conversations really are about what did the customer expect, what's been delivered, what are their expectations, and then how are you actually going to manage to those expectations. So it's a lot about what Monica says, and that, and also what Deb says, is that everybody owns customer success. It's just being super clear about what they own at what point in time in the actual relationship, and holding each other accountable for the delivery of what that piece of the relationship is.
Deborah or Monica, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'll just add, I think the biggest friction point, depending on how you're set up, the biggest friction point tends to occur with sales and customer success, right, in terms of being customer facing. And it's an evolution, and I think that's the biggest downside of having customer success sit as a separate organization versus with sales. What we've done, again, it's a journey, it's an evolution, but what we've done is we've sort of organized ourselves and our CSM teams to mirror our sales teams, and are really trying to drive that one-to-one relationship and partnership with sales. Because I think what we've realized, and our sales teams have brought this to light for us, is that it's a very complementary skill set, right? It's a very complementary way of thinking. It's a very complementary set of objectives. And so the more that you can drive, one-to-one relationships, even all the way down to the AE and CSM level, the less friction you're going to have.
Yeah, so definitely you have to design that experience. So you were asking about the handoffs in the organization. Ideally, you do design what that experience is supposed to be, and you have very defined handoffs. And most of us are in the SaaS business, and we know that the moment of truth in SaaS that defines the beginning of the relationship is the onboarding experience. And so really focusing on that and making sure that there's a clear handoff between what sales sold, what the customer think they bought, and what you're going to deliver is the key first step. Then I think that the handoff into the organization, whether that's through professional services or customer success, making sure that implementation is successful, and then evaluating how you performed at the go-live moment. And then it's a matter of monitoring that on an ongoing basis through the customer success team by looking at your usage metrics and other KPIs that help you to identify account health. I would also just say, in terms of, you said the metric to kind of unify you, my religion will be NPS. I think NPS is a good unifying metric. I've seen it work well across businesses if it's used in every part of the business. But also retention and net retention, right? Because, I think the challenge in service organizations, and since this panel's about cross-functional, is that service organizations tend to be really measured on their billable hours or their profitability or whatever your KPIs are in service. And when they don't have goals around retention, I think you get in conflict. And so ideally, the two metrics I say can really unify an organization: NPS, which is a leading indicator, and retention, which is a lagging indicator.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, next question is we've already started to explore this, but how do you work with other organizations within your company to be able to ensure your customer success throughout their journey with a company? And do you have any tips that you want to share with the audience about what works well for you? Deb, do you want to start?
I'll kick things off. I'm not shy. Yeah, this is definitely a cross-functional responsibility. Your customer's experience is being impacted by every part of your organization. So when I think about the parts of the organization you work with, you're working with support on escalations, you're working with professional services on implementations. If you have a consulting team, that may be the same. You're working with product on product capabilities. You're working with marketing on customer marketing initiatives. You're working with sales to ensure proper handoffs, maybe to manage renewal or upsell processes. So you're definitely working across the entire organization. The one tip I would say that I think we implemented that was very helpful is I run a weekly customer escalation call and bring those functions together so the CSMs have an opportunity to raise the issues that are affecting the customers. We track those to closure, and we make sure we get the right people on the phone so that we're getting knocking down those barriers to customer success versus relying on email and other forms of systems to try to resolve those problems.
Monica, what about you at Box?
Yeah, I mean, I think how do you work well with other organizations? I think it depends on the organization, honestly. And, you know, so I mentioned this team that we have that sort of thinks cross-functionally and identifies hot spots of opportunities. Typically what we'll do is we'll sort of structure an initiative or a project around that, and we'll, in a pretty similar format, we'll convene the initiative leads, you know, every so often to monitor progress and see how things are going. And what we've found is that it really varies by function in terms of whether, you know, the retention mindset is whether we're driving an initiative and we're in the driver's seat, whether we're helping in a really active way and we're in the passenger seat, or maybe we're just in the back seat and sort of demonstrating, you know, what the impact of a particular effort is or is going to be on retention. And any of those are fine, I think, as long as you're getting to the right outcome and as long as you're in the car, so to speak. And you know, I think the advantage of doing that across a set of initiatives is that you've then got sort of one voice of retention that can bring all of that together and understand the aggregated impact that you're having across the company. So that's what we've sort of figured out. And I think, again, it really does vary. I mean, you know, with a product organization, they've got a lot of other competing things potentially that they're working on, and so maybe you are in that back seat. There may be other initiatives that, you know, don't reach priority, and they don't reach priority due to resource constraints. And so that's one where you can, you know, you can be in that driver's seat and you can help move things along more quickly.
And April, what about you, and what's working well at Zuora?
I think I'm going to focus my answer on the relationship that we have with sales. Just over a year ago, we hired a new EVP of sales who didn't come from SaaS. And so it was really a huge opportunity to help educate him on exactly why customer success was important and what type of relationship we wanted to have with the sales organization. So through a bit of work, through a bit of education, maybe a fist pound on a table once or twice, to help ensure that he understood the type of partnership that we wanted to have. And I think because the way the responsibility of customer success at Zuora is for identifying upsells and expansion opportunities. We're the ones who are owning that relationship with the customer as they've gone live. And because of the deep relationships we have, we're more likely to hear before an account executive, a salesperson, what those upsell opportunities are, whether it's for us, it's contracted volume, or it's moving from one edition to another edition, or it's for product add-ons. And because we're finding those opportunities for sales, then there's lots of opportunities to collaborate with them in terms of saying, here's the opportunity, run the campaign and actually close the deal. And so I've seen a dramatic shift in the last year and a half where CSMs are truly being recognized for identifying that upsell opportunity and bringing it to the salesperson to actually close.
And then you have scripted processes to be able to hand off those opportunities?
Yes. So Monica talked about really trying to align your CSM organization with the sales organization. That's something that we're doing at Zuora. And so the whole idea is that if you can really streamline the relationship between the CSM and the salesperson, they will get into a very natural, healthy rhythm for how they're going to actually approach each of the customers. So I'll take it one step further. Part of what a CSM does for a Zuora customer is conduct optimization workshops that really take a look at the health of that business in terms of, are they getting the value out of Zuora? Those optimization workshops can be small in scope or broad in scope. And what ends up happening, the outcome of that optimization workshop is a success plan. And that success plan is owned by the customer, it's owned by the CSM, and it's owned actually by the salesperson. So that's how we attack and understand what a customer is trying to do, current state versus future state.
But do you have clear divisions of responsibility between customer success and sales that are very well understood?
I think the answer is that in some cases we're figuring some of that out. We added 138 salespeople in the last year. That's tremendous growth. And so you have to constantly remind yourself what is your role versus what is the salesperson role. And sometimes it's less about role and responsibility and it's more about what's the right thing to do for the customer, regardless of what your title is, and who actually has the better relationship that can actually accomplish what is the desired outcome for that customer. So in some cases, I've seen CSMs actually step up and own part of what a salesperson would do. And in other cases, I've seen an account executive do more like CSM function because that's what was needed for the customer at the time.
Monica, I see you shaking your head.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's tricky too, because the role of CS versus sales also depends on the customer segment you're talking about, right? So at Box, I mean, we serve customers that are as small as 3 users, right? Either a small company or a team, all the way up to large enterprise where you're talking hundreds of thousands of users. And if you put a salesperson's mindset on for a second or hat on for a second, the way they're going to approach those 2 opportunities through the life cycle is really, really different. And the role that CS can play in that is really, really different. So, whether you're talking about customer segment or you're talking about life stage, I think that's another thing to think about, which is if you're talking about let's say you're talking about an enterprise customer that's new in their journey with you, a salesperson is likely to be much more engaged because they know there's a lot of expansion or upside potential, whereas you may be talking about a customer that has been with you for some time. There's still expansion opportunity, but it's harder, right? From an ROI perspective for a salesperson, that could be a great opportunity for CS to step in. So I think the roles and responsibilities question certainly needs to be figured out, but there are all these sorts of nuances depending on the customer situation.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing because I think this is a really important topic that I hear a lot in customer success communities in terms of CSM versus sales and how much a CSM owns from a commercial relationship. And I think your idea on segmentation is spot on, right? In certain segments, they can be one and the same. But I think in your top tier accounts or maybe your mid-tier accounts, our experience has been that when you try to combine both the commercial elements and the CSM elements, you really have 2 disadvantages to that model. Number one, a CSM is probably not the best person to go competitive against a hunter sales team on a competitor that's trying to take your account away. And that can be a disadvantage for you if you're expecting the CSMs to be, really the one that's responsible for the renewal. The other thing that we found when we had them combined in one person is that we were not proactive. Because you're dealing with the cycles of whatever your renewal processes may be and maybe ebbs and flows in your book of business, that takes your eye off the ball of being proactive and helping drive adoption of your product and making sure that you're doing your quarterly business reviews and all the other things that you need to do as part of a CSM. So at least our learning was when we put them together and had the same person be a CSM and be responsible for renewal and upsell, we found a lot of disadvantages to that model. And so we came out on the side of a CSM's job is go drive adoption, go give the customer value, be their advocate. The sales team's job is go get the renewal, go drive upsell, and I think that's working better for us.
Sorry, just one thing. I think if you're doing the right thing by the customer, the sale comes. You should never be in a situation where you're selling for the sake of selling. Like if you're doing the right thing by the customer, they have meaty, important use cases, right? You're fundamentally impacting their business. Those expansion opportunities are going to come. You never have to really use the word sale.
I was going to ask you, April. You're responsible for customer success as well as renewals. Is it the same person, or are they 2 different functional organizations? And do you run into the same problems that Deborah was talking about?
We do have a renewals team, and we also have a CSM team. I think given where Zuora is at in our evolution of our business, I think when we look at the renewal, we make a determination: is it going to be a flat renewal, or is there an opportunity for upsell or an expansion? Or is it an automatic renewal? We have lots of contracts where a customer will hit their renewal date and it just automatically renews. I think if you, in terms of customer success and the way we operate at Zuora, is that if it's an automatic renewal, it's handled by the finance team. If it seems like it's going to be a flat renewal, meaning that at this point in time in the relationship with that customer, given the health of their business, it's going to be a flat renewal, the CSM can manage that process because it's a fairly straightforward process. But in the majority of the instances, you hope or expect that there is an opportunity for upsell or expansion, or maybe perhaps customer might be thinking that they might need to do some different things in their relationship with you, and in that case, you definitely want it managed by the salesperson or by the account executive, because they're the ones who are going to be able to address any competitor situations that may arise, and or be able to position the services that you're offering in such a way that will result in an upsell or expansion opportunity.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So moving on to the next question. Is there a way that you're measuring success of your team? Monica, why don't I start with you?
We don't measure anything. I'm just kidding. Yes, we measure both activity as well as outcomes, kind of as a guiding principle. On the activity side, we look at two primary things. One is, have we actually deployed the customer correctly? So we have a pretty simple activity metric that we use that tells us that a customer is sort of up and running. Beyond that, we recently launched something called the Customer Sophistication Index, because what we realized is that a customer could seem quite active, they could look like they were up and running, and it wasn't necessarily that they were using Box, but more importantly, how and why they were using Box. And so what the Customer Sophistication Index allows us to do is it's an aggregated metric of a bunch of different actions, both at the user level as well as at the admin level. It helps us gauge essentially how deep the relationship has become. And we think that that's a primary focus of our CS organization that helps us go beyond just the initial adoption phase. On the outcome side, we live and breathe by retention as our core metric. So we look at everything. We look at logo retention, dollar retention. We look at it by segment. We look at gross retention, net retention. But as a company, what we've realized is you really can only get everyone's heads around one metric. And so the one metric that we use is dollars net retention, and there are a number of reasons for that. But again, I think going back to the cross-functional nature of this and topic of this panel, if you are trying to align an organization around retention, it's really, really hard when people are already thinking about other things to get them thinking about multiple metrics, and you really need to choose one and go with it.
So what do you think about that, Deborah?
Yeah, I would agree. I think net retention is the ultimate goal. And, for those of you that don't know, net retention is obviously how much you retain plus how much you add on to it. But also I think that the two other metrics that help to indicate the success of that, your ability to deliver on that net retention goal, are going to be, again, I think NPS is important because it does also give you not only a leading indicator, but also help you identify whether or not you think that's going to translate into other acquisition business through recommendations. But also usage is a diagnostic. It helps you to really identify whether customers are using your product, and that again will help to lead as a diagnostic on whether you'll retain that account or whether they'll expand it based upon that usage.
Okay. And April?
So my peers up here have already said everything that I would say, with one notable exception. When I think about measuring the success of not only customers, one of the things that we have at Zuora is a framework called Padre PPM, and that's actually how we measure the health of our business. So Padre PPM stands for pipeline, acquire, deploy, run, expand, people, product, and money. Those are all the metrics that we look at on a very regular basis to understand exactly the health of our own business, as well as customer usage, our retention, our adoption. Are we, in fact, from a product perspective, are we delivering the features and functions that the market is demanding? From a people perspective, what does our recruiting efforts look like? What does our turnover actually look like? Collections, are we collecting the money that we expected to collect? So when I think about, how you measure customer success, there are all the great metrics that you mentioned, and a lot of them appear within this framework, especially when we look at expand, because expand is one customer success metric, but just in terms of an entire business perspective, we look at end to end. Are we acquiring customers? What does our pipeline look like? How many customers are we deploying on a regular basis? So that's how we inspect not only the health of our customer-facing business, but also our prospect business, and also just the internal health of us as a business.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so last question is, any lessons learned in 2 minutes or less about managing your team?
hire people better than yourself.
Fabulous. Deborah?
I think, it goes back to what I said about the account management, CSM kind of role is real role clarity. What is it that you expect these people to do, and have you really empowered them to be able to deliver on that? I think those are some key elements.
Yeah, I'd say for us it's, think about your team as the expanded team of your whole organization. And don't forget the importance of thought leadership, because I think whether or not people are directly comped or incentivized on retention, at Box, every single Boxer is also a shareholder in the company, and retention plays a huge part in that. So the more that you can call that out and show people kind of, how it works and the economics behind it, the more support you'll get.
Okay, well, thank you. And now I'd like to open it up for questions. I'm sure you have some. We have a couple mics in the aisles. If you could come and ask your question so we can hear you. And you can direct it to either all the speakers or one speaker in particular.
I had a question about the weekly health call that you do.
The what? I'm sorry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Weekly health call.
Deb, that's yours.
Okay.
How do you run that? So we also have similar weekly calls, but how do you make sure that the executives that are there or management that are there are focused on the issues that the CSMs are bringing up? How do you run that call?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, I'm the only executive on the call. The rest of them are director-level individuals that are responsible day to day to do the real work. So they're the ones that actually can get the job done. We have that. We run it regionally, so we run one in North America and one in international region. And we bring together the Director of Professional Services, support, and the representative from product, and then the full CSM team for that region. And what we do, I think that really helps for our overall executive exposure is we publish those meeting notes on a weekly basis as well to the executive team. So we keep that visibility. Because one of the things I've learned in years of account management is, when account goes away, all of a sudden it's the CSM or the account manager's fault. And it wasn't because the product didn't work, or it wasn't because support didn't solve their problem. It was because, the CSM didn't do their job. So we try to keep the exposure to make sure that everybody understands what parts are in fact impacted because of product, because of professional services, because of support, or any other part of the organization. So the call notes indicate the account, what the issue is, and actually what department is responsible for resolution of that, and then we track time to resolution. Does that answer your question? Okay.
You got a thumbs up.
Okay, other questions? We must have other questions.
We in our company, I work at Aptio. We try to have a prescriptive success program that the CSMs run, and one of the things we are trying to do better is have ownership that the way sales sells, the value matches the value we're trying to deploy, and the value that we put in the success program, and the value, frankly, that's in the product over time. Just curious how you do that. Do you do it well? And any tips? Because we are actively trying to have a single go-to-market that strings value all the way from the front to the back.
Well, one of the things we do, I won't be shy, I'll make this brief so these guys can talk as well, but one of the things we do is we document at the win what are the reasons why the customer purchased the product, what is their expectations, and then we build that into our long-term success management framework. Do we do it well? No, we don't always do it right, but we've got the process defined, and we're continually refining, making sure that that's being handled end to end.
This may not totally answer your question, but I think one of the things that to just maybe remember to take a step back and do the thoughtful retrospective, because I think sometimes product thinks that what they're going to build, customers will buy, and you as the customer advocate, need to educate the organization. Sometimes it could be feedback on implementation. Sometimes it could be feedback on what they bought versus what they, what they thought they bought versus what they actually got. It could be product-related information. It could be an experience with the support organization. Please be fearless in making sure that that feedback gets to whatever department or organization that will benefit from having that respective feedback. So that's one of the other things that I would encourage everyone to do. We really oftentimes are running so fast, so furious. You're dealing with the customers who are red hot on fire, but maybe sometimes it's more important to take a step back and say, how do we get to this situation? How do we want to approach these types of situations differently going forward?
Yeah, like in the pre-sales process, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to work with sales and try to avoid those situations down the road. You know, for bigger customers where it might be worth the time investment, I know we've thought about and toyed around with the idea of even having CSMs or our professional services team involved, even in the pre-sales process, just to ensure that the dialogue makes sense, that we're making promises we can live up to, et cetera. On the smaller customer side, you know, I think one of the things we've learned is that, you know, the sales team, they've got a lot of different things that they're thinking about as they're trying to close a sale. And very well intended, right, but dealing with a lot of volume and moving really fast. So the simpler that you can provide them with a toolkit that they can use in terms of what to think about, that you already know are going to be potential issues down the road, the better. So even, you know, even something as simple as like a checklist that they think through or work through, or potential red flag areas to look out for, I think have been pretty effective.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you. I'm with Intel Mastery, and I was really interested in what you had to say about your sophistication, the Customer Sophistication Index. Could you speak a little bit more about what metrics you track and how you do that?
Yeah, so the Customer Sophistication Index, and again, the genesis of this was, you know, we realized that while we were tracking activity, there were situations in which a customer could show really high activity. They were using Box, but maybe they weren't using us for the right things, and therefore they could still surprise us and come up at risk, right, after some period of time. I see heads nodding, so I assume that you relate. So we decided that we wanted to have a metric that essentially captured not whether or not a customer was using our product, but how they were using it. And you know, this is even, for us, it's still a V1. I think we're going to refine it as we go along. But part of the index, it's a 1 to 100, score, index score. And part of that is calculated based on sort of how the product is set up. So for example, we know, you know, if you've integrated Box with another product, we know that that's going to be stickier because you're using Box for a very meaningful use case. So you get credit for that, right, in the index. And so about half of the index is comprised of those admin type settings or features. And then the other half of the index is comprised by what we see users doing. So for example, you know, if you use mobile, right, we know that that's a sticky feature. And so we'll give you credit in your index score for using mobile. And you know, again, it's going to evolve. It's going to evolve as the products evolve. It's going to evolve as our understanding evolves. But we launched something, I think there's about 10 different factors that feed into the index score right now. And we just did a bunch of, you know, reverse analytics to try to figure out kind of what mattered, what didn't. Gave them very simple weightings and, you know, came out with it. And I think so far, the whole team is right here, so they can talk to it probably better than I can. But I think so far the reception's been really positive because even as a CSM, right, that's the conversation you want to have with your customer. Like you don't want to have a conversation that says, oh, you're using our product, everything looks great. You want to have a conversation which says you're using these things, which is fantastic, but maybe you should think about using this also, or did you know that you can use this also? And so I think what we're finding is that it's making the conversation a lot more meaningful.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for attending our panel, and thank you to Monica and Deborah and April. And our panelists will be outside this room if you have any other questions that you want to ask any one of them. Thanks again.